next Wednesday night will be the last Wednesday night of this series, and our beloved teacher Lonnie will be back.
Amen.
So she can fix whatever I mess up tonight. The next week is Holy Week, and that starts Sunday, April 10th. So this coming Sunday, we're in the sanctuary. I want to be clear, everybody knows that. On the 10th, we'll be out at Lake Nixon. One of the things that we have learned in the pandemic is we think outdoor worship is something we need to keep in the hopper. That there is something about worshiping God in an open sky with birds chirping that teaches us something about God. So on Palm Sunday, we will be out at Lake Nixon. The church is going to cater a lunch afterwards, probably barbecue that Chris is working on. And then we'll have an Easter egg hunt for kids. And so that'll be a big fun day. I hope that y'all will make plans to be there for that. And then the next Sunday is Easter. That week's Holy Week. We won't have Wednesday night that week because we will have Monday, Thursday prayer stations in our sanctuary. Not a formal service, but prayer stations from 6 to 8. So come and go at your own pace. We structured that a little bit today, and I think that will be worth your time. We'll have a Good Friday service back out at Lake Nixon, in which we'll process the cross, and then Easter in our sanctuary, which I couldn't be more excited about. Any questions about any of that? Let me tell y'all why we're doing this series. Some people might say, Wednesday nights are better suited for Bible study or something more Christian than misinformation. A few months ago, I stumbled on an article by MIT Technology, so a reputable source. And it was a study on troll farms, right? Organizations that create fake memes. In this study, it was about all kinds of troll farms and where they come from, who does that, who is behind disinformation. And it's bad actors all around the world, right? Not just people in this country, but bad actors all around the world. But there was a specific section on disinformation and misinformation that targeted Christians, okay? Like with the purpose of misleading Christians. In this study, they found the top Christian American pages on Facebook, the top 20 Christian American pages on Facebook. Of those 20, 19 were troll farms. There was one reputable page. What that told me is hundreds of thousands of Christians were going to these pages in which the intent was to mislead. One of those sites got more traffic than Walmart's Facebook page. So I want you to think about how many hundreds of thousands of people, of not just people, Christians, that those troll farms were targeting. That's an extreme example. Obviously, Lonnie's talked to us about more insidious and harder to spot things than troll farms. Hi, y'all. But that was an alarm for me. Why have Christians become so susceptible to this stuff? I also see it. I don't have to read articles. I see it with my own two eyes on social media, on many different platforms. So tonight we're continuing to use Lonnie's work without her personality and genius. So I'll try not to mess that up tonight. Isn't she gifted? Oh my gosh, I've enjoyed her humor and her wisdom all the way through. And obviously I'm not Lonnie, but she will tie us up again next week. But if there's something you don't like tonight, it's on her because this is her stuff. Next slide. Last week, she finished with algorithms. That when you're reading social media is also reading you. Google is reading you. I think that's part of what has made this a new day for us is that people open up Facebook, they see article, and they assume this is the news of the world. And in some ways that it is the news of the world. But it's also the news that Facebook, Twitter, whatever your platform is, in this case, TikTok, they have algorithms that are based on what they've seen you hover over, spend time reading. They know you. They know what you will pause and look at. And I want to come back to something that Lonnie said week 1, because I think it's very important. When you sign up for Facebook, how much does it cost you? Nothing. So why are they one of the richest companies in the world if it's free to sign up for Facebook? Ads. And ads and data, those 2 sources. They sell data, they give data, sell data, and advertisements. But in order to sell advertisements, you have to convince companies what?
That it's worth their money.
That it's worth their money. And how do you convince companies that it's worth their money?
You have a lot of people that look at it.
That's right. So the intent of these social media platforms is to generate wealth. And they generate wealth by selling you stuff and selling your data. And that comes by giving you the things that will keep you on their sites. Okay. And they're really good at it. Okay. This is a slide about TikTok algorithms. I'm not going to get into too much of that because it's just a different platform, but the same story. TikTok's reading you in the same way that Facebook, Twitter. Oh, I forgot to say this. Last week, not last Wednesday, I have spring break, 2 Wednesdays ago, Lonnie was talking about information silos and how these platforms are reading you. And that Wednesday, I had eaten lunch at Tropical Smoothie. I never eat lunch at Tropical Smoothie. It's the first time I've been to Tropical Smoothie in I don't know how long, but I just stopped in and got a smoothie. That night, as I was going to bed, on my Facebook feed was an ad for Tropical Smoothie. I don't know how it read me except 2 ways. It could have located me on my phone or my credit card payment. I think all of that's kind of linked. And so I say that tonight to say it's not just that Facebook knows what you're doing when you're on Facebook. Facebook knows whatever you give permission for Facebook to know about you, which could tap into your location services. Where are you eating, shopping, and where are you spending your money? They know those things about you. Okay.
Kristen, I had that happen to me this week.
Mhm.
I was on my computer checking out Waco, Texas, because we're thinking about taking a trip.
Hey,
Turned on my Facebook. First ad was for a tour in Waco,
yeah,
Texas.
there you go. So that's a perfect example. I think, Lonnie, there's nothing else that needs to be said, that Facebook knows when you hover over something on Facebook, but Facebook also knows when you Google Waco, Texas, and they give you that. So think about what Facebook does when you Google right-wing whatever. It's going to keep feeding you that, all the while you think it's news. Next slide. This is where I really want to go. Let's talk about bias tonight. If y'all remember the first night, Lonnie asked us to do an online survey. I think these are the results. I might be wrong about that, and I didn't get a chance to ask her. 3 questions. Is bias in the news media a major issue? People strongly agreed with that. The second one, I can trust the news to give me an accurate, verified information. There's about halfway. Some yes, some no. Final question, most journalists are intentionally biased and seek to get their audience to believe specific things. That also is right there in the middle. Obviously, these are of major concerns, those questions. So I want us to talk tonight. My real task tonight is to talk about bias. I hear people say, I only want unbiased news. I will say, I don't think that's a thing. I don't think bias is avoidable, because I think it's intrinsic to our identity as humans. So long as news agencies and journalists are humans, they will see the world through their eyes in the same way that you and I see the world through our eyes. I don't think there is such a thing as unbiased anything. All right. So how do I check my bias, and how do you check your bias, and how would we ask journalists to check their bias? Part of it is to admit that we all have bias. I think that's a really good start. If you're oblivious to that, then you're off on the wrong foot. But every news agency that you read, every journalist you read, every preacher you listen to, every pundit you listen to sees the world through their eyes. That to me is bias. We interpret the world through our experiences. That's not bad or good. It's an is, and it's inevitable. Okay? So I don't think there's a such thing as an unbiased whatever, and we can tease that out if later if we need to. However, bias can be destructive sometimes. If we don't know that we have it, if we're unaware of the bias of the person we're reading, or if we only see the world through the lens of one news agency, then we are perpetually captive to the bias of that one agency. Next week, Lonnie's going to give us some techniques to overcome some of what we've talked about. One of which is to diversify the sources of your information. At least then you're getting multiple biases, right? You're not imprisoned in the bias of one, oftentimes oblivious to the fact that it's biased. That is different than propaganda, though. Help me tonight. Let's tease that out a little bit. What's the difference between bias and propaganda?
Propaganda is deliberately designed to deceive.
Okay, there you go. So bias is often subconscious, right? One of the most difficult things for my two eyes to see is my own face. Bias is most often unconscious. We're unaware of our own biases, our experiences, our history, our beliefs, our convictions. We'll talk about different kinds of bias here in a minute. But bias is most often subconscious and unintentional. It's just, we can't help the way that life has shaped us seeing the world. I don't want to say that. I don't think we're totally enslaved to that. We can remedy some of our experiences by seeing the experiences of other people, by living with compassion and empathy, right? The way I've seen the world isn't the only way to see the world. That's part of becoming an adult and a human. But I can't unsee the things that I have seen. Okay? Propaganda is intentional misleading, right? It's lying when you know you're lying, because the purpose isn't telling the truth. The purpose is some other objective than telling the truth. I make this distinction tonight because here's where I think a lot of people are in this country. People identify a news agency as biased, the assumption being that another news agency isn't biased, and then say, I don't want to mess with that because it's biased. But there is a difference between being biased and propaganda, which is outright deception with the intent. That's a good word, with the intent of deceiving. I posed this question to y'all a couple of weeks ago, and I can't get it out of my mind. The truth has something to do with power, and lies have something to do with power. There is a reason why most people in Russia right now do not know what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Is that because their news agencies are biased? Or is that because there's an outright propaganda campaign in Russia? And of course, a state-run media is a problem also. It's why freedom of the press in a democracy is no small matter. Putin is controlling the narrative in Russia. So
But
this,
is he?
do I?
But is he?
Well, what do you mean?
Somebody else is, if they're getting the wrong news, somebody else is controlling there.
Yeah.
If they're getting our biased news or our biased propaganda.
Yeah, that's right. I see what you're saying. Nazi Germany rose and remained in power because of propaganda campaigns. not just because the news agency saw the world in a biased way. Does that make sense? Am I making sense to y'all? There is a difference between bias, which is inevitable, though can be checked, and propaganda, which creates crimes against humanity, right? Can y'all see the difference between the two of those?
Yeah, and my point of saying that was because I feel like we over here are the propaganda for them in Russia. We have people here, news agencies here, that's the news they're getting.
That's right. There are
So
places,
that didn't make him control it, that makes us control or something.
yeah.
Is that way too long?
No, I think there are places in Russia that are showing American news agencies. But it's a state-run media that supports and enables that, right? Here's the best way that I know to say it, and I had actually forgotten that I said this, but on our last church podcast, I was interviewing two Baptist media agencies, and one of them reminded me that I had said this, and it's genius. This is a cup. If you look at that cup and say, that cup says Arkansas Asset Funders Network, and I say, no, this cup says Alice in Arkansas, we can have a discussion, right? That's how bias operates. You see the cup from your angle, and I see the cup from my angle, but we're both seeing the same cup. That is bias. That's human bias. If I say, this cup says Alice, and you say cup, that's a watermelon, then we're going to have a hard time conversing. One of the problems in this country at the moment, and not just in the country, it's in the church, it's at family dinner tables, and it's everywhere people go right now, is that what we're struggling with is not this cup says Alice or this cup says Arkansas, but is this a cup or a watermelon? And that is created by propaganda, okay? The intention to deceive. And it's created by bias with no bounds, which is, in a way, that is propaganda, is bias with no bounds, right? So let's talk about bias. Next slide, Chris. In Lonnie's work, she's identified, based on many sources, 5 different kinds of bias. I'd like for us to talk about these, and if I don't do a good job tonight, I think there are links that we can follow if you want to investigate any one of these or all of them. One is partisan bias. You can understand what that is. It's when a journalist's or an agency's own political allegiances begin to color the way that they report the news or don't report the news, the stories they tell or don't tell, and how they tell them. It begins to impact their coverage of a thing, given their partisan allegiances. So that is one kind of bias, is partisan bias. I want to pause here for a second. We all know that voices can be biased. A journalist can be biased. Can ears be biased?
Sure.
This is something I've thought about a lot too. I've heard preachers that, their bias, was yelling from the pulpit. But I've also heard preachers who I thought did a really good job, but somebody in the pew heard it in a biased way. So what I would invite you to consider tonight is both voices can be biased, the way something is communicated, and receivers can be biased too. Sometimes a person's own partisan allegiance prevents them from hearing what is a fairly objective presentation of information, right? The second type of bias is demographic bias. This is when a journalist's race, gender, ethnicity, social class impacts their coverage of anything. It so colors the way they see the world. This is true of you, it's true of me, and it's true of journalists, right? Journalists are human too. Does someone who grew up in a neighborhood south of 630 in Little Rock, do they read the news, watch the news with the same coverage, do they watch the same broadcast with the same concerns that someone who lives in the Heights watches the news with? Would a journalist who grew up in the Heights and a journalist who grew up on Wright Avenue, would they tell the same stories? Think about it, the gazillion things that happened in Little Rock today, all compressed in a 30-minute news segment. There's so much that's left out of that. So who decides what's news and what's not news? That might depend, the way you answer that question may depend upon your address. It may depend upon the way you were raised. It may depend upon where you go to church, a mosque, a synagogue, Second Baptist, Emmanuel. Go ahead.
Can I just say, I worked at a school that one year had a fire, school burned.
Mhm.
And so after the fire, of course, we had lots of news stations coming and talking to staff members and so forth. And then we watched that same coverage on the news. And sometimes I maybe was standing right there when you were interviewed, but they cut and clipped certain things.
Mhm.
And we had all kinds of staff members going, I didn't mean it that way, or I said so-and-so, and they didn't cover that. I'll be honest, there was a news station that I totally quit watching because I felt like they were so biased from the news that they showed. They were very selective about what they showed on the news.
Right.
They did not tell the whole picture.
Right. And that's obviously a concern, always. And every story is edited, right, by somebody. So somebody decided that it was news. Somebody decided whether tomorrow night it'll be news again, or whether we'll move on, and somebody edited that story. Somebody decided who to interview. Imagine a journalist that's an immigrant. In fact, the one of these links takes us to a journalist who's an immigrant. Her parents were immigrants, and she was a first-generation American. So, but she was a child and watched her family navigate the immigration system in this country. She said, "I'm convinced that helped me. When I report on issues of immigration, that helps me." So this is not bad. There are things that you know better because of your life and your experiences. But just as that can help you see, that can also blind you. And all of us have demographic blind spots that we need to be aware of. One of the remedies of that, of course, is a diverse newsroom, where when people sit down and edit a story, they're coming at it from different angles and different perspectives, where somebody's there to say, I'm not sure that's the whole story. Something like that. Corporate bias, where the business or advertising interests of an outlet influence their coverage. We've already talked about how much of the media and news in this country is owned by certain people. But even some really reputable news sources sell advertising. Does that influence the way that they publish the news? Do journalists and the sales department, do they talk to each other? You ever thought about that? Think about climate change. Can we talk about that for a second? How media agencies talk about climate change when so much of the big money in the political process in this country comes from businesses and corporations that have a vested interest in not telling the whole truth about that. This was an issue that was seen very clearly in the days where big tobacco had issues with how they marketed themselves, right? So what are the corporate interests embedded in a news story? What about Bloomberg when he owns a major media agency and then decides to run for president? Are there conflicts of interest there within that news agency? Can they be objective about him as a candidate? The fourth bias, and I want to park here a little bit tonight because I think this might be the most surprising one in the room, is neutrality bias. In an age where everybody's polarized, what's our reflex? All right, the middle. Why can't we just come to the middle? Let's tell both sides of the story. How many times have you heard that? And we all know that oftentimes there are at least two sides to a story. And good journalism will tell both sides of that story. But neutrality bias is when outlets are so concerned with appearing neutral that they don't tell everything they should tell, because they're trying to carve out this middle ground so nobody accuses them of choosing sides. And so you start having conversations like, if we have a Republican senator come and speak to Bill 3109, do we have a Democratic senator come speak to Bill 3109? If we have someone who voted for it, do we have someone who voted against it? That's probably good journalism, and that's probably a good practice. But there aren't always two equivalent sides to a story. I always resent it when people play the Nazi card, and I'm about to do it twice tonight, but it's the easiest way to make a point. If you were a journalist in Nazi Germany and you had someone from the resistance come and speak about what you saw happening in Germany, would you feel compelled then to interview someone from Nazi leadership to come and give the other side of the story? You see this often with climate change. I'm going to come back to that. Today, 97%, that's the number that I will stake my blood on today. 97% of all trained scientists in this country say climate change is real and is caused by human activity, namely fossil fuels. 97%. Does that mean then, by the way, more scientists agree that that is a reality than that smoking causes cancer? Think about that. Does that mean that if I'm a news agency and I have a scientist come and say, y'all, climate change is real and we better change our ways yesterday, that the best practice then is I find one of those other 3%, or I find an article that's funded oftentimes by a vested interest of big oil, and I feel compelled for that person to come and speak so that nobody accuses me of being in the pocket of 97% of all scientists. You might call this a false equivalency bias. Sometimes we try to make two sides of a story, but they're not two sides of a story. Or the two sides are right and wrong are the two sides of that story. You might call it a false balance. I think it is wise for news agencies to strive to be fair and balanced. That seems prudent to me. It seems wise. But is the objective to be balanced, or is the objective to be truthful? And if the objective is to be truthful, then sometimes the other side is just wrong. Okay? Finally, big story bias. Y'all know the reflex of a big story in journalism. And part of journalism is covering events that have real lasting potential to change a thing, right? There's a big event and the news vans travel 100 miles an hour to get there. Or in our day, the Facebook account manager starts typing as fast as they can. This bias is the bias to get there first and to have the big story. Oftentimes they will skew facts to do so, ignore important information to do so, or jump to conclusions to do so. It may not be a big story, but they got there first and they want it to be a big story because it sells, right?
Kind of like watch the news, and I feel like every time at the end of every commercial, breaking news, and it's like, that's not breaking news. You've been talking about it for an hour.
That's exactly right.
On 3 days.
Yeah.
Y'all, I had knee surgery the week after the election in 2020. So I'm in my recliner and I can't do anything else, or that was my excuse. And they were still counting votes. Do y'all remember how the election on Tuesday? So I'm in my chair on Wednesday. And by the time I heard the breaking news music one more time, and it was like the same county in Georgia and Arizona, I knew all the counties in Georgia and Arizona. I'm like, this is not breaking news. We've been here for 4 days. So yeah, it's this big news bias because it sells and it keeps people engaged, right?
Well, also, there's a rush to get it out, so you don't check sources, check the facts.
That's right. That's right. It could be wrong.
But also, you stayed there for 4 days, like they had you for 4 days.
Well, they did. I did have a vested interest. That's right. Any questions about any of these kinds of bias that you're still confused about? These aren't the only kinds of bias, but in terms of the way we consume media today, these are 5 biggies, I think.
The only thing I'd add, Preston, is just sometimes it's the language we use. Like if I were to say, Preston Clegg misled me, or Preston Clegg lied to me.
That's right.
Now that, that I'm saying in essence the same thing, but just the choice of words that I use puts you in a better light than the other.
That's right.
For most people.
Did you listen to the podcast, the most recent podcast?
Yeah.
So they use that example.
A podcast?
And are you putting it on a tee for me? or-
Yes.
Okay. You're about to get fired. Is what
I said the podcast. Well, there's lots of podcasts.
So for those of you who don't know, Second has a podcast called Because It Is. And I feel like we do really great stuff. It has an awesome host. by the way. So look it up. You can access it through our website. And I think there's a lot of good stuff on there. So we're talking about the media with 2 people who live it and oversee news agencies. And I asked them really about this neutrality bias, right? And they brought up nearly word for word what you just said. One of them said, I think the media works too hard not to sound biased. And the example he used was if a politician stands up and lies, and even more so, lies and lies and lies and lies again, and the media keeps saying it's misleading, do you call that a lie? At what point do you call, how many lies do there have to be before it's called a lie? But you just made a great point, John. The moment you call it a lie, it makes that politician a liar. And if you're trying to be a reputable news agency in this country and you call a politician a liar, what is everyone and their mama going to say?
Well, you're just on the other side.
Yeah, you're partisan bias. So is it misleading information? Is it they were misguided? Is it unsubstantiated claims?
Alternate side.
Is it alternative facts? Or is it lies? That is an example of how this neutrality bias works. What does the media call it? Right? That's what goes into the mindset of some of these decisions. And it shapes the conscience of our nation.
One of the big ones, corporate bias, I think, goes along the lines, because news corporations are for profit. They need eyeballs, and they report what will attract eyeballs, not necessarily always news,
Right,
but what supports eyeballs, and that becomes news because it supports eyeballs.
right.
And then they amplify and amplify and amplify.
If a teapot has enough money in it, you create the tempest in it, right?
I
Well,
was,
Great.
on spring break, sharing the things I've learned with my, a couple of my brothers. I have plenty of them, and a couple of them were there, and I was telling them things that we were learning in this class, and one of my brothers pointed out that Nick Salmon, that's heard of him? You probably recognize, it's a picture of a young man in 2020, in January of 2020, and it looks like he was, it looks like he was being hateful to an indigenous group of people.
Indigenous, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And he was actually protecting them, but the way they took the picture and the way all of the news stations showed it, showed the opposite, and he sued them, and he's like 18 with $200 million, $250 million that he sued these companies for misrepresentation. And I remember seeing that picture two years ago, thinking, "Wow, I can't believe he would treat people that way."
Right,
And so it really made me think of these bias, like big story. Like it was a big story that he was treating people this way, but really he was protecting them from the other young men doing it.
that's a great point. And as I was preparing for this, I clicked on all the links in Lonnie's presentation, and one of them told that story exactly. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Nick Salmons?
It was the Catholic school that was on on spring break, and indigenous people were doing a protest, and they kind of came together, and then
Gotcha, okay, yeah.
it made it sound like there was a real,
It's like a standoff.
That they were kind of protesting.
Yeah. All right. Last thing I want to talk about. By the way, we can come back to any of this if you want to, and click on any of those and watch the 2-minute video. Go to slide 26. It's 2 ahead, I think. Let's talk about 5 major types of misinformation. These are the 5 umbrella categories that keep tripping people up in our day. I don't think, well, we'll keep going. The first one is misinterpreted satire. I think satire is very powerful. Satire has been around for a long time. Y'all, if you think SNL does not influence elections in this country, I think you're fooling yourself. Because when you can make a mockery of someone, when you can make people laugh, there's a reason it's funny. And you are shaping consciousness when you do that. There's a place for satire. There's also a reason that kings in the old world used to have satirists arrested because they knew their power over people. There is a place for satire. I think the book of Revelation in many parts is written as satire to make a mockery of the Roman Empire. The problem with satire is when people don't realize it's satire. I'll give you one example. Next slide. So this is when a piece of information that uses humor or exaggeration to critique a person, organization, or policy. Next slide. So here's an example. This is a meme on Facebook. Trump stopped taking intelligence briefings saying, "I can do my job without any intelligence whatsoever." And then it says his actual quote. Notice how many times that was shared. There's 150 comments and 831 shares. Also, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But here's an exercise I would encourage you to do. If you're on Facebook and you see something like this, click on Terry Woods. That's the name at the top. I bet if you scroll down Terry Woods' page, it'll be meme after meme after meme after meme after meme and very few pictures, especially of late. no real personal information on that page, and that will be a fake page.
Or there may be 3 entries, 3 posts.
It may be someone who used to have a page and someone has taken control of that page. It's a meme farm. It's just this kind of stuff all over again, right? So that's a good practice. Before you share a post, click on Terry Woods. So this was shared 831 times. Next slide. Another post. This one was shared 17,000 times. This one was shared, retweeted on Twitter 1.6, 1,600 times, 3,800 likes. Quoting, I can do my job without any intelligence whatsoever. Next slide. If you Google that, it comes up to the New Yorker. She found the New Yorker. You can see that it's from the Borowitz Report, a column in the New Yorker. Next page. This is satire from the Borowitz Report. It says it on that page, right? And it says he is a satirical columnist. So that's one example of satire that people, thousands and thousands of people didn't recognize as satire and shared it as if it was something Trump literally said. Was it something he could have said? Absolutely. It was something he could have said. But this was satire that was shared thousands of times that people didn't realize. Not everything that you read was written to be objectively true. It was written to be funny. So read it as such. Okay. The second example is just manipulated content. This is misinformation in which it took something that was true. Lonnie's already given us some examples of this, but altered the original such that images that have content added or removed using photo editing tools. So here's one, 2 women wanting to end Father's Day. Doesn't that make you angry? She's quick to circle here. Can you see that the F is over the hand on that sign? So that's a sign if you're that observant. The print is literally over the hand, so you can tell this is not real. If you go to the next slide, that's the actual photo. It seems to be 3 women saying they regretted their abortion. Those are the signs they're holding. But someone took those, cropped the lady on the left out, took the 2 ladies on the right, and created a fake photo about ending Father's Day. Snopes, there are a gazillion of examples of that, y'all. Okay. Next example. This, Emma Gonzalez ripping up the Constitution because she hates our country, creating outrage and anger. Why don't we love our country anymore? And the real photo is her tearing up some kind of targeting bullseye. Sorry. Imposter content. This is misinformation that falsely uses a well-known name, brand, or logo to fool people into believing that it is authentic content. Y'all remember the Starbucks issue? It began as a real story. Starbucks did not handle racially charged incident very well, and had 2 black men arrested wrongly. And that is a true story. And they closed more than 800,000 stores for racial bias training. That happened, right? So.
Yeah, it was 8,000, not 800,000.
That'd be misinformation.
Yeah, sorry for that. That was not propaganda. That was ignorance. That was stupidity. Next slide. So someone created this meme. We're sorry. Here's a coupon. Okay. Next slide. But if you look closely at the coupon, there's a discount code 1488, which would mean nothing in the world to me. And does that mean anything to any of you if you saw a coupon that said 1488? Okay. But then this became a thing, next slide, because someone tried to make the argument that 1488 is a combination of two popular white supremacist numerical symbols. The first symbol is 14, which is shorthand for the 14-word slogan from Germany. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. The second is 88, which stands for Heil Hitler, H being the 8th letter of the alphabet. And so there you go, 1488. This is Starbucks
We got like,
putting out white supremacist propaganda. Aren't you angry? How can they do this? All that jazz. It never was a thing. That's not anything Starbucks did. This is what Starbucks did do. Next slide. They did offer a "we're sorry" coupon. We know we can do better. Values all people of color. We're working on employee sensitivity training. They had a Dreamer Day, August 11th. Help Starbucks fight bigotry, but in none of their real work was there a 1488 on any of them. So it's total manufactured outrage, right? That it took a real story of a real company that can be charged. I've met people that like would worship at the altar of Starbucks, and I've met people that loathe and despise Starbucks. So it taps into that animus that people feel one way or the other towards the company, creates a false narrative, and boom, you've created a crisis. 4, false context. Misinformation that takes an image, quote, or other piece of content and puts it into a new false context to change its meaning. So it's just enough truth, but then it changes the context to make it untrue. A lot of times this is hard to spot. Chris, click that video. These are if you read the subtitle, these are Democrats busted on camera stuffing ballots in the 2016 election.
I think this video has sound.
No, it doesn't have sound.
Okay.
Watch closely. There they go. Democrats. It says she almost looks ashamed. You can see the anger in the comment to the side. We need military armed, ready, shoot to kill anybody that does this. Can y'all feel that anger that's being charged at this? We'll stop after this one. This is in Pennsylvania. Watch them stuff the ballots. They wait until no one's looking.
Go, 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 go.
All right, we won't watch. There's several of these. Go to that next comment, Chris. I wanted to see that. I didn't see that. Notice they're all women.
Better read it first before you read out loud.
Yeah. All right, I'm not even going to read it. All right, so there's several more of these clips, right? So what's your response? You saw the tape. Good Lord, y'all. They're recorded on, here's one response. Because the cases are recorded on cameras, people are trying to swing the vote, want to make sure that no one sees what's happening. Response 2, This post provides some weak evidence of voter fraud, but not any reliable concrete evidence. It's difficult to tell what's going on, and little context was given. Response 3, yes, due to the fact that we see several cases of people stuffing ballots into a box. While this would seem legitimate if they were only delivering one ballot at a time, the multiple stacks give them away. Their guilty expressions and hurried movements tell that they are committing a crime. Next slide. That's not Pennsylvania, that's Ukraine. And you can see the flag, white, blue, and at the bottom, you can barely see it, it's red right there. And I don't even know that it's ballots. I don't know that it's not, but all that to say, this didn't happen in this country. Okay. And yet it is couched as, on that page, as Democrats stuffing ballots. And there's at least one comment that we need armed military there to shoot people who do this, right? Do y'all see how quick we go from something that's totally untrue to we need people with guns? And, January 6th, when we live in lies and untruths, bad things happen, right?
Let me clarify something or ask you to,
Okay.
you said Ukraine, that flag is the Russian flag.
Maybe
Ukraine
it is
is
Russian.
yellow instead of red.
Yeah, that's right. So
That's
maybe
the
that's
Russian
Russian.
flag, so I think that must have been Russian.
Okay, so that was misinformation on that.
Misleading.
Yep, that's twice.
We're
No, we
talking
lied.
about
And
Russia.
I mean, how many lies do I have to tell before y'all start calling me a liar? So fabricated content is misinformation that's entirely made up and is designed to deceive you into thinking that it's real. Next slide, Chris.
Kristen, to me, it just looked fake from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest problem, and I have understanding why it looks fake or weird to me, but there are other people that just accept it as face value. And I don't know if it looks fake or weird to me because I know what you can do with computers, and I know I've read and studied all of this.
Right.
And are other people just totally naive? Because I see people posting that with those kind of comments.
Right.
Or am I just being?
Let's come back to that, okay? Because I think you're right, and I want to end there tonight. This is a page about deep fakes. So think about movies, right? How movies digitally,
CGI.
computer generated graphics and how they manipulate people's face, right? So all of that technology that you used to have a whole crew in Hollywood to do, a lot of that you have on your phone now. So what you used to have 20 professionals doing, someone with a little know-how and a cell phone can do a lot of that now. Let's watch this video just to give one example. This is our last slide tonight. This should have sound.
Okay. I can't get to it because it's
harm. This is your Bloomberg Quick Take on
During an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
Jordan Peele created this fake video of President Obama to demonstrate how easy it is to put words in someone else's mouth.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
Not everyone bought it, but the technology behind such frauds is rapidly improving, even as worries increase about their potential for harm. This is your Bloomberg Quick Take on deepfakes. Deepfakes, or realistic-looking fake videos and audio, gained popularity as a means of adding famous actresses into porn scenes. Despite bans on major websites, they remain easy to make and find. They're named for the deep learning artificial intelligence algorithms that make them possible. Input real audio or video of a specific person, the more the better, and the software tries to recognize patterns in speech and movement. Introduce a new element like someone else's face or voice, and a deepfake is born.
It's actually extremely easy to make one of these things. There were just some breakthroughs from academic researchers who work with this particular kind of machine learning in the past few weeks, which would drastically reduce the amount of video you need actually to create one of these.
Programs like FakeApp, the most popular and widely available for making deep fakes, need dozens of hours of human assistance to create a video that looks like this, rather than this. In August, researchers at Carnegie Mellon revealed software that accurately rendered not just facial features, but changing weather patterns and flowers in bloom. This advance is not yet available to the public. But with increasing capability comes increasing concern.
This is kind of fake news on steroids, potentially. We do not know of a case yet where someone has tried to use this to perpetrate a kind of fraud or an information warfare campaign, or for that matter, to really damage someone's reputation. But it's the danger that everyone is really afraid of.
In a world where fakes are easy to create, authenticity also becomes easier to deny. People caught doing genuinely objectionable things could claim evidence against them is bogus. Fake videos can also be difficult to detect, though researchers around the world and at the US Department of Defense have said they're working on ways to counter them. Deep fakes do, however, have some positive uses. Take Cereproc, a firm that creates digital voices for people who lose theirs from disease.
Speech synthesis is the artificial production of human speech.
There are also applications that could be considered either good or bad, like the many, many deepfakes that exist solely to turn as many movies as possible into Nicolas Cage movies.
Oh, hi, Mark.
So I don't really know what to say about that, except people are getting really good at this stuff, and you're going to have to be vigilant. And sometimes even the best of us may not be able to tell what is real and isn't in those regards. We've talked about a lot of kinds of bias tonight. We've talked about a lot of kinds of misinformation tonight. I'm happy to talk about any of this that y'all want to. But not keep you any longer than you want to. Anything you want to explore a little more?
Well, I think the real scary thing about the picture video thing is because I think my bias is things I see with my own eyes.
Right.
That's, a video is unbiased.
Right.
Is my bias.
Right.
So I mean, it's sort of, but once again, even if you don't, do the fake stuff, manipulate it. But even, a picture taken from, or a video taken from this angle versus one from that angle shows, you could have two radically different interpretations of the same event being filmed from different angles, even though they're not trying to fake you. No one's trying to fake you out. It's just somebody took it from over here, somebody didn't take it from over there.
Right. That's absolutely right.
But my bias is that if you show me a picture or show me a video, my gut reaction or my initial reaction, that's got to be, that's what really happened.
Yeah.
I think the concern is that when it affirms something I think I already believe, I don't go to the point of questioning it.
Exactly.
If I like Obama and Obama says that, then I'm probably gonna say, oh, that seems rational and reasonable that he said that, and therefore I hit the share button real quick.
That's exactly right.
And boom, it's out of control.
Yeah. I want to go back. Let's finish with Lois's question. At a macro level, this, I think, is what's happening to us as a people. Sometimes the ability to do a thing comes first, and then the ethics of whether or not you should be doing it or how you should be doing it comes later. I'll give you an example, and this is going to sound really warped as a Baptist minister. When the printing press was first invented, and they started saying, we're going to print the Bible, Catholic priests were very concerned. And the reason they were concerned was if you put the Bible in the hands of people who aren't trained to read the Bible, then the church is going to fracture. They're going to start arguing with their priests. They're going to come to all kinds of weird conclusions, and it's going to be dangerous. If you put the Bible in the hands of everybody, it's not good. The people need to come to church and learn from their pastor who is all wise, who's been to seminary, who knows Hebrew and Greek and the nuance of the biblical text. And I see so much wisdom in that. Just kidding. But the Catholics were right about some of this. The church has splintered in a gazillion ways. And people have come to bizarro conclusions because they read the Bible for themselves, right? I'm a Protestant, I'm a Baptist. I think the Reformation was a good thing. But the technology and the ability to print books came first. And then the responsibility of printing them and owning them and reading them came later, right? I think we have a whole lot of technology in our hands today, like mind-boggling technology in our hands today. And I think our brains have outgrown our souls in some ways, where in a way, if I don't know something today, it's my own fault, right? Because Google it. I can tell you anything you want to know about. Give me 10 minutes and I'll tell you something substantive about it. And it'll probably be good. It also puts all sorts of misinformation in my hands. And so it elevates each individual person to be able to discern good from bad, mis and dis from real, and humility enough to investigate your own biases. And I think that is what we're lacking today. Y'all, there's so much good that has come from social media. I'm looking at a room populated with guests tonight, many of whom first met Second Baptist Church online, right? Thanks be to God. Hallelujah. But there's a whole lot of the ethical part of this I don't think we've begun to probe. And so in some ways, I think the technology is more advanced than our ethics are. And we've got to catch up to it. One of my favorite sociologists is Neil Postman. He died several years ago. If you can read a book by Neil Postman, you should read it. He wrote a book in the 70s on television called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he talked about how television turned news into entertainment, where a very serious story and a Razorback report was only separated by now this. And we're not programmed to reboot our minds that quick to go from conflict in Ukraine to Razorback score. And so we can't tell the difference between, a story that matters and Britney Spears' love life because of the manner in which the news comes to us. Another thing that Neil Postman said was, if you took from the time of Christ to 1950, all the change of human civilization in 1,950 years, and then took the amount of change from 1950 to wherever we are today, the world has changed more since 1950 in terms of technology than it did from 1 BC to 1950. Y'all, my grandpa was born when people rode in horse and buggy. Those were his earliest memories. And in his lifetime, he saw people on the moon and beyond. That is rapid change. Neil Postman says what has changed is change. but our souls haven't caught up to that technology yet.
Well,
I think that is what's happening, Lois, that we can do more than we should. And we don't yet know what to do with this tool. And it's doing a lot of wonderful things for us. And it's doing a lot of terrible things to us that we probably don't even realize.
Preston, you're saying we need to catch up. Also, the problem is that the rate of technology change is increasing geometrically.
Absolutely.
I mean, so we're already behind. How do you, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what world's gonna look like when my grandsons are my age.
Right.
I mean, they're gonna see in things that I can't even fathom being reality. Their reality. And I mean, and so it just really, my question is it a fool's errand? I mean, I think I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, boy, how do you get there?
No, I agree. How do you catch up to something that's changing faster than you can adapt? Right.
Reference that podcast. Learning to see.
Yeah. Last Easter, in Eastertide, I did a small group that was based on a podcast called Learning How to See. There are 3 speakers on it, Richard Rohr, Jackie Lewis, and Brian McLaren, all of whom are leading voices in my mind and thinkers in our day. And the podcast talked about learning how to see, and it talked about 19 kinds of bias. And the way that influences the way we read the Bible, the way we see the world, the way we see our neighbors, the way we see racism, the way we see poverty. I cannot recommend it highly enough. The podcast is Learning How to See. And there's several platforms that you can find it on. I think Chris linked the Center for Contemplation and Action.
Any podcast that does podcasts, Apple, Spotify, they all have it.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments tonight? Thank y'all for being a part of this. Lonnie will conclude us next week with what to do. Lateral reading. That's a good term for us to begin using. What does lateral meaning? What does lateral reading mean? So we'll talk next week about that and other tools that will help us do some of this hard work we've talked about tonight. But your presence means a lot. I hope y'all are getting something out of this, and it's not just influencing what you think, but how you live. Lord, we want to be people of the truth. We want to be wise enough to know it when we see it and know it when we don't see it. We want to be known as people who speak the truth, all the while knowing that you are the truth, that the truth builds up, that it leads us to love and generosity and peace and wholeness. So teach us to be people of the truth, even in this day where it seems like nothing's nailed to the floor anymore. Help us, oh God. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.